So, it's wonderful to have you here today. We're opening our exhibition, Nigel Hall and Manager Yadigar Hall, in our Woodstock gallery. And it's just wonderful to be able to have this exhibition after all the time we've had last year with the pandemic. It's just a beautiful exhibition to be having in the gallery. Please, can I just ask if you can give me a wave if you can see our PowerPoint? I'm sharing the screen now. Or a few thumbs ups. Brilliant. Okay, that's good. Right, that's good to check before we go any further. Okay, so I'm glad everybody can see the PowerPoint. And I just wanted to welcome Nigel, who is joining us today from his home. We've had some technical issues, and so not from the studio today, but from his home. Nigel, thank you so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you here. Nigel Hall probably doesn't need much of an introduction to many of you. He is one of our most esteemed and respected sculptors in Britain today, and it's just really thrilling to be working with him. He has an amazing reputation and amazing work on all different scales, which we'll discuss today, and no doubt you will have seen it, as he is in so many public collections all over the world, from Australia to Switzerland, the Louisiana, in Denmark, and Japan, South Korea, all over the world in public collections, and also in many corporate collections. Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, IBM, Mercedes-Benz. I mean, it's such an amazing CV. I couldn't possibly cover it all, Nigel, but it really is wonderful. And what we've got today, we're going to be talking about Nigel's practice in general, and also looking at the work of Manager, his late wife, who we're also delighted to represent at the gallery. And we're going to be looking at Nigel's work as a whole, really, but also looking at the exhibition as well, and at Manager. So here on the left, we have one of the install shots of the show in our Woodstock gallery, with both of their work. Anyway, Nigel, welcome.
Thank you, Lizzie, for the kind introduction, and welcome to everybody to my home in Notting Hill, sunny Notting Hill today, which is nice. But there'll be lots of images of the studio where we originally planned to be, but I think this is going to work out very well. Yes.
So here, moving through to the studio, Nigel, your studio is in Balham, isn't it? Perhaps you want to tell us a little bit more about it, because the building in itself is absolutely amazing. I think this gives people a little bit of an insight into the scale of it.
Yeah, it's a building I found or a friend of mine found in 1990 or 91. At the time, I had a studio in Old Street in East London, near the city, and it was on a 3rd floor, so rather impractical for heavy sculptures. And he found this wonderful, it's an old church hall, and it's 60 feet by 60 feet. It's a pure square, very high, with curving, you can see in the left-hand image, I think you can just see 4 curving arches. So the whole thing is quite symmetrical and geometrical and very apt in a way for my work. I think my work has been influenced by the place as much as anything. And the steel pieces, the metal pieces aren't made on the premises. They're made by a team I've worked with a long time, and they're in the Midlands in Nuneaton, and they are fantastic. They make work in Corten, which is this piece in front of us here. That's a piece called Natural Pearl. And Corten, I expect a lot of people know that by now. It's a material that was invented, I think, about 70 years ago for machinery and rolling stock that couldn't be easily painted and renovated. So it looks after itself to a good degree. It forms an oxidized surface, but it doesn't continue to rust away. It seals itself, and it gets a deeper color as it ages. So it's very useful in architecture, industrial applications, and also sculpture. This piece, Natural Pearl, it's a work that I made about 3 years ago, and it does exist on various scales. There's a work, I think this is a piece that's on loan to Pembroke College, Cambridge at the moment, and it's beautifully sited in one of the old quadrangles there, Ivy Court. And it has it's an addition of 2 at this size, which is just around 2 meters high. The other one, I think, is a collection in Switzerland. I did also make a large work for Germany, for a collection in Stuttgart, 3 meters. And I'm in the process of starting a work of 4 meters high for the University of Iowa in the United States. It'll be on their campus outside of the business school. So that is the story of Natural Pearl.
Fantastic. Should we move on to the next slide, which is this also Natural Pearl from another direction? Natural
Pearl from another angle, and in the background on the left-hand image, it's a piece called Spirit, which I do believe you have a little maquette.
We do, and that's what's one of the wonderful things about your work, Nigel, is that it's accessible on so many different scales. And one of the things we're going to talk about is the different materials. The maquette we've got in the show is actually in aluminium, isn't it?
That's right, yes. And the work on the right is from a big series of works I made with the title Solio. There's a very large one in a foundation in Switzerland, a place called Schöntal Monastery. And that piece is similar in structure, but it's 10 meters from stem to stern. It's a big piece. But I've used many different materials over the course of my career, starting, I suppose, with clay. And at every stage, I enjoy the process and rather regret leaving behind the material that I was using. I really was sorry to put down clay. I loved working in it, but the necessity of the forms I was making required that I moved on to a different material. But the clay ones are dear to my heart, and I still have a couple of the works in the studio. They were cast and then cast into fiberglass, painted fiberglass. But as things move on, the next material I used was tubular aluminium tubes painted very muted colors and quite linear, quite spare structures. But at the moment, it's mostly steel, wood, and bronze.
And this particular one, Solio, we showed a smaller bronze version also in the business school, didn't we? I think we might have a photograph of that later. Let's just move on to the next slide. So another studio view showing quite a lot of large scale work and work in different materials. You've even got in the foreground one, which is in a sort of bronze with a green patina, which is quite unusual in your practice.
Yes, that's a piece from 1986 called Sharing. And it's a sort of balanced piece. You can only see half of it, of course, there, but it rocks and it finds its own point of balance. I've had it in the studio a long time. The funny thing is, people admire it when they come to the studio, and it's still in my studio. I don't understand how some things stay put and some things move on. But there we are. That's just the way it goes, because the work, the larger work in Corten, has moved on to a collection in Jersey.
Yeah, so in the back we've got Square Dance, haven't we, which was exhibited first of all at the Royal Academy, wasn't it, a couple of years ago?
That's right. And most recently in my show, which is closed quite recently, at Anneli Judah Fine Art, which was my longest running show. I think it went from November until, well, a couple of weeks ago, I think, but it was actually only open to the public for a couple of weeks. It was very sad, but it's still available to be seen online and beautifully filmed online. So it's worth a visit. There's also a walkthrough video of the exhibition.
Perhaps it's also worth us saying at this point, we're also open to studio tours within current rules of numbers. If people wanted to come and see what's currently in your studio, we're happy to make that arrangement. So
yeah,
please do get in touch if that's of interest.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to do it, because the studio is big enough to, have enough things to see and space to see it in. So it looks a bit cluttered at the moment, but it's actually more roomy than it looks, perhaps.
And so thinking about materials, we touched on bronze. This is a larger scale bronze. This is mirrored, isn't it?
This is mirrored, large mirrored, 3 meters high in black patinated bronze. in a collection in Gloucestershire.
It looks absolutely fantastic. So what are the, if somebody's thinking about larger scale work and they're not sure whether to choose between bronze or quarter and steel, how would you advise them, Nigel?
Well, I think it's, people have preferences. I find Germany, they're very fond of Corten, although they do obviously have bronze pieces as well. But other places find Corten perhaps a bit too brutal or a bit too industrial. But other people appreciate for what it is, which is a changing material. It's affected and formed by the weather, by rain and sun. It likes to get wet and get dry, get wet and get dry, and it deepens, and it has the runs of weather running down it. It's a very organic and beautiful material. Bronze is similar, but Corten is even more striking in the way it changes with the climate. A painted steel piece, I do make painted steel as well, but that is really what it is. It stays as it was originally painted. But Corten and bronze are very beautiful in their way that they have a natural coexistence with the location. So it really is a preference.
And practically, with like the differences with Corten and bronze, are there different sort of in terms of their upkeep and how you look after them? Are there differences there with how they?
I think
like Corten changes, but you know,
all sculpture needs to be cleaned occasionally. It's funny, you clean the house and you clean your car and you brush your teeth. People forget about sculpture usually. They put it there, they think that's it, job done. But it gets inevitably bird lime and it gets a bit muddy and dusty. So it does require a bit of spring cleaning. Both can be cleaned usually by jet washing. Bronze does like to have a bit of polish put on it. It rarely gets it, even public works, which are usually contractually obliged to have a clean and a polish every so often. It rarely does. But the other thing about, both Corten and bronze do tend to have a residual runoff. So they do tend to, you'll have seen a bronze sculpture on maybe a Portland stone base. It does have a greenish runoff which stains the stone. It's not terribly unattractive. I think Corten runoff is less attractive for some reason, and therefore I've got methods by which you can overcome that. On a grass, it's fine, both are fine, because it just vanishes into the earth. But if you put a Corten on a stone, a beautiful stone terrace, for instance, it's just as well to make sure that there's a runoff for the stain. And I've got a very good method for that, which I can disclose at the right moment. Now is not the right moment.
Well, that's good to know. Like you say, everything needs cleaning, and I guess people forget there is a little bit of upkeep. There's not too much upkeep. And
I mean, I say, it needs upkeep. It looks its best when it's clean. If you get bird lime too long on any surface, it could be corrosive.
And I guess there are works, I mean, we can talk about this, that you perhaps would just say are suitable for a particular material. You wouldn't necessarily, certain structures and certain work would lend themselves to one material or another, or like you say, it could also be cultural. And I'm thinking about some of your wall-mounted works. You've got one behind you. Oh, yeah. I can see some in the background here as well, which are birch ply. You don't tend to go on the wall with your bronze works so much, do you, for example?
Well, I have made quite a few works in bronze, both bronze and steel for wall.
Okay.
They're slightly more demanding in terms of hanging and so forth, but I make all my own wood pieces. I enjoy the act of making them. I don't make steel, although I used to weld long ago, but I don't do that anymore. It requires too much machinery, and I prefer all the metal bashing to happen out of earshot, to be fair. But wood pieces I enjoy making, and I've invented or developed my own technique for the wood wall pieces, which require a skeleton of wood on which is applied sheets of birch ply, top quality birch ply. And they're very stable. They've been in the studio in the summer, the temperature is quite high and it's quite chilly in the winter. And the works have been placed all around the world. And I haven't, touched wood, had one come back for splitting or warping. So it's a very stable structural method.
What we've got here, actually, it was quite interesting. I was thinking we haven't got photographs of where you make your works on paper in your two-dimensional work, but we do have a wonderful large work there, which I think we've now sold, if I'm not, or maybe that one is still available. But you have a separate area, don't you? Just to talk about that briefly, where you do where you make your works on paper, and we'll come to that in a minute. But that's just around the corner.
Yeah, it's in the white wall where that long orange and black drawing is. Behind there is a workshop where I make drawings and my wood pieces. And to the right is a glass partition. It's very practical in the sense that the big space, the big main volume of the studio is impossible to heat. It gets really cold for a few months of the year. Most of the year it's okay, but I treat it almost in the winter time as a outdoor sculpture space. You know, you tell people put coats on and it's fine. But the other space behind that wall is heated. So the glass partition means I can be in there and see out into the main body of the studio and still stay warm. But yes, the works are made in that smaller workshop.
I clicked through a bit prematurely, sorry, but it's a beautiful space there. And I think you can see I'll go back again. The light is amazing with the skylights as well. And the shadows that get cast are very, very dramatic. And that must be quite rewarding to see the light change and how the work.
It was a very dark space when I first moved in. There were windows all down the side, 5 windows down on the left and 5 on the right. And yet the space as a whole was quite dark, but I wanted to fill in those windows to have clear walls and quiet and security. So in place of the windows, as you see in the left-hand slide, I put in a very long skylight. And as soon as that went in, the place was filled with light. It's amazing. And it's on the south face. And people said, but I thought studios were supposed to be on the studio skylight should be on the north. But I liked it, the fact that the sun comes up at one point, moves across, and the shadows change throughout the day. This is, for me, how sculpture should be seen, in moving light that changes throughout the day and different conditions. So it's a wonderful space, very peaceful and very high.
So just moving through here, we've got another angle. So the kind of the glass area and that wall we're looking at is now on our right, and we're looking back, and you can see in the foreground numerous maquettes which are made of wood, which you make those, don't you, Nigel? And again,
yeah, absolutely. But they're a mixture. Some of them are maquettes, some of them are small sculptures, and stay as small sculptures, because I'm rather fond of small sculpture. I find the excitement of large work is one thing, but a small intimate piece is quite rewarding in itself. So some of them are remain, as I say, as small sculptures, but others seem to have potential to develop, and others are. I mean, in the left-hand slide, on the right-hand side, there's a maquette in plywood, which is the working model, which I took to the Seoul Olympics when I made a piece for one of the stadiums in 1988. So that's a piece that could unscrew a flat pack, be reassembled when I got there. So it would indicate to the fabricators in Korea how the piece would be made and put together. So that's a slightly different small work again. So some are made as studies to give to the fabricators to show them how a piece is to be made. And others, I say, are small. In the front, there's a dark bronze piece called Glacier. And that is a small version of a big...
This one? Yeah,
that's a big sculpture that's in, I think it's the Unilever collection, if I'm right, on a biggish scale. I think it's around 2.5 meters or something like that in bronze. And then the center at the back, the black, very black piece, is a piece I like very much called Spin Cycle.
This one, yeah. Oh, sorry.
That's right.
I'm trying to highlight it and I clicked. I love Spin Cycle, and I've seen this piece. We had it on a smaller scale in aluminium a couple of years ago. And you were telling me this is a larger piece in bronze that you've made. Is that right? In an edition of 2?
Edition of 2, absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And so is that so? And there's also another version of it there on the back on a plinth. Is that also in bronze?
That's in bronze. That's a small bronze maquette. Again, I think in edition of, I can't recall, 3 perhaps.
Yeah.
These are away. I think one is in with my Madrid gallery, and one is in Germany with my gallery there.
Well, it's lovely to see. What's interesting, I think, is sometimes when you have, a work on a different scale, but in a different medium as well, and how it changes. But also is, obviously very dynamic. And I think it's, it's knowing the piece in aluminium, now seeing the larger piece in bronze, it's got its own presence, and it's rather wonderful. We've got a question, I think, actually. I might just pop in with that now, Nigel, if that's all right. It's from Alice Hiller, and she says, can I ask about the relationship between presence and absence? She's referring to spirit in particular, how the ovals of the metalwork simultaneously define and release emptiness. And separately, do you experience circles and oval shapes differently when you make with them, Nigel? So it's about the kind of presence and absence and the difference between the circles and the ovals when you come to making a work.
Well, Alice has hit upon something very important to me, which is the what is called, I think, in the Taoist philosophy, the full and the void, things which are substance and things which the substance indicates. Like, in a way, I think they also have the analogy of a potter. He makes the substance, which is the clay, but the usefulness is the absence, namely the interior, the emptiness of the pot. So I've always made works that have a degree of transparency, where the volumes or the presence is indicated in quite a sort of a slight way. My works in aluminium tubing were very skeletal, very indicative of space. And I remember right from when I was a student, some of the earliest pieces I made there was a piece in 3 parts, where each part was separated in space from the next. So the eye and the imagination had to jump that gap. But it is that absence and presence that has always interested me. I mean, it's a bit like how I made a sculpture once of, it was a big fiberglass hill with a flag, obviously a formalized flag. And for me, the flag was an indicative of how it would demonstrate the invisible wind, the wind being invisible, but the objects it touches made it present, its presence felt. But it's a complicated and fascinating subject for me, but I don't want to go on too long about it. But in the drawing behind you, Lizzie, there's a drawing of a circular drawing with 2 oval elliptical dark blue and 2 absences. Now, my whole series of new drawings is about this subject, where the emptiness is as potent as any of the other forms. In fact, it is given more drama and more emphasis. So that's,
yeah, I think that's very interesting. And
the other part of Alice's question was the circle and the
yeah, well, I guess yeah, how you experience circles separate, because obviously there are circles and ovals, and what your feelings are towards them and how you experience them.
I mean, the ellipse for me is one of the most thrilling of forms. It has a dynamic and a sort of elasticity. I mean, just drawing an ellipse, and I must have drawn thousands and thousands of them, either freehand or using the old method of 2 pins and a loop of string. I don't use a computer. I tend to do it with the old-fashioned method. But the dynamic of the ellipse, whether you're on a small scale or whether you think of it on the cosmic scale, you know, we're all at this moment traveling through space in an elliptical orbit. And I look at the table in front of me, and there's a glass of water. The circle that forms the lip of the glass is an ellipse. It's only a circle from one very specific point of view. So most circles, and the circle is ubiquitous, they're everywhere, but most of the time we're seeing them as ellipses. So in the image on the right, which is the Said Business School, commissioned from a few years ago, there's two circles, but we're reading them as ellipses. And they have so the circle itself becomes more dynamic when you move around the piece. And that's the other thing. Sculpture is to be seen in movement and in stillness. I love the idea of sculpture being like a dance. You have movement and you have stillness, point and counterpoint. And that's really probably enough to say about that subject. I hope that's explained.
Fantastic. We had one kind of follow-up question from Linda Collinley, which was, when did the ellipse first come into your work?
Well, the earliest I can recall was when I lived in America, 1967. I was there on the West Coast in Los Angeles. I was on a Harkness Fellowship, and I chose to settle for the 2 years in LA because it was a thrilling large city, but probably equally important, if not more so, was that it was very close or within striking distance of the Mojave Desert. And I used to take a lot of trips out there. And to cut a long story short, I was in the desert one time, and there are salt lakes, and there's a dry lake called Soda Lake. And I had an experience on Soda Lake, which was to do with the perimeter of the visible lake, and a sense of the depth below where the water was, because there was a pipe, a rusty pipe which stood up from the ground, and I dropped a pebble down, and it dropped down the pipe until it hit water, which was quite surprising. So there was a combination of experiences that came together and resulted in a piece called Soda Lake, same name as the place, and it later became a dance piece for Michael Clark by Richard Alston, the choreographer. And that piece was 3 parts, and one of them was an ellipse, 1968. I think it was probably one of the earliest ellipses, certainly the most important piece I made at that time. Linda, that's what I can answer for that.
That sounds fantastic. I think that was a fabulous answer, and it also answered a previous question as well, which was about the Mojave Desert. So that was a very useful piece. Thank you. We're just moving on here to show some of the smaller work and in the current exhibition. And actually, what strikes me that on the right here we have one of your newest work, Triple Rising, which is absent of ellipses and circles. Perhaps you can tell us about this one here, which is also behind you, I believe, on your shelf.
Yes, it's an edition of 3. So you have one in the exhibition, and I've got one here. It's not brand new in its idea. It's a piece that I came across. Well, it crossed my mind for a project that I was involved with. The project sadly didn't come to anything, but it did encourage me to have the plywood original cast in bronze. But it does have echoes of quite a few pieces. There's one of the largest pieces I've made is called Crossing Vertical and Crossing Horizontal. One is, as it sounds, obviously they're descriptive. They both have similar structures, and one stands 10 meters tall, and one stretches like a bridge 10 meters across the ground. That 10-meter one, horizontal, is in the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. And the 10-meter vertical is not very far away, on loan to Barnsley Town. It's outside Barnsley Town Hall. And both of those, and quite a few others, use this comb. it's almost like dissolving, slightly dissolving the material from one direction to the other and back to the original direction. It started a long time ago. The origins of this structure started on one of my many, with Manager and I used to, my late wife Manager, the painters, we used to go to Switzerland every winter for, I think, over 30 years, always to the same place up in the Engadine, most beautiful valley. And we took the train up the valley, and there was a certain river and a gorge overhanging the river on which a ruined building of some form. You just had the corner, like a corner of a building, like a shard of a building perched on the very edge of this cliff. And the first time I saw it, I was struck by this vertical, precarious, yet stable balance. And next time I took the train, which would have been a couple of weeks afterwards on going down, I decided I'd make the quickest of sketches. And on subsequent journeys, I suppose I did it about 10 times, made a quick sketch of this, going past in the train, it had to be fast, a little sketch of this experience, this vision really, of balance. And I think out of that came this, I think it also accounts for the sloping base, slightly, I suppose, Giacometti-ish base, which gives stability to something quite fragile. But I quite long to make it on a larger scale, actually. There was a possibility, but it didn't come to anything like a lot of things in the art world. Excitement and
wow, it's beautiful to have it in the gallery.
yeah.
There is an installation view of it on the left there, and again, just some smaller maquettes. Ghost, this is Ghost, isn't it? So that is a larger work as well, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, this is very much going back to the earlier question about absence. I mean, this is very much the elliptical form is the absence, and kind of emphasized by the break in the circular orbit around it.
Just some install shots now of some of the larger work of when we worked together at the Said Business School. Thought that would be nice to show. Again, we've got square dance there and wide passage, which is, again, I know you do these, but more unusual to have such low works like this.
It is unusual. It's 6 meters. But, it's a very simple piece, which I don't know, I find quite satisfactory, because the cone from which it springs, obviously you take the center point of the cone, it's on an angle, so that the band that springs from it has a lean and it hits the floor in a particular way. But it's a simple cause and effect sort of piece, and traps shadow and light. And just by the way, the piece on the left, Square Dance, is going to be housed at the University of the Arts in London, right by Tate Britain.
Oh, right.
It's going to be a gift from me to the university, mainly partly because I'm very fond of what used to be called Chelsea School of Art, where I ran the MA sculpture for 7 years, and I had a wonderful time, but partly because the outgoing Vice Chancellor, Sir Nigel Carrington, has done an amazing job, and I gave it partly for him, really, in his honor, and also because I think it'll be very beautifully placed there. So that's where that will next be seen. Well,
I will look forward to seeing it. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to see work in public. Yes, we're going backwards a bit to our discussion about materials here. So this is, again, a business school.
Yes, and you've paired it with the image on the right, which is a study for it, although quite a large study. It's in MDF, which is quite a stable and strong material, but it was made as a preparatory work for the bronzes.
And I think it's probably worth mentioning that this is the first time that we showed your work with Managers was at the business school. I think it was a couple of years ago now. And it's really lovely that her work is now in their collection. And we were discussing this earlier, how your work on the right, these are hanging on the same corridor, is actually a diptych, but Managers' work, although they look like a pair, are conceived as individual works.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think we hung work, if not these two, then very similar works in that position for the exhibition. And I really felt they looked so fine there. And it was lovely that we're on the same wall as my work. Between the two comes the wood double circle piece, which you would have seen earlier. Yeah, the one on the right is a two-part, a single work in two parts, like a diptych. A lot of my work are diptychs. But Manager and I exhibited together, you know, of course, in Notting Hill, where we are in our flat, we had work hanging together, but they seemed, although so different, they complemented one another quite well. But we showed in exhibitions together in Switzerland and in Korea and a few other places, and no, Japan and a few other places. But we had very different ways of dealing with things. I am, I won't say infuriated by my demand of myself for precision, but it does, why I've always used charcoal right from the earliest days. I've always used charcoal in my drawings, is because charcoal creates mess, and I love a bit of mess around the precise forms that I make. It gives a place for them to inhabit, to live. Manager's work was quite much more loose and much more fluid, and I think because of that, they worked together quite well.
I think they're both very serene, and I guess there's an innate sort of geometry and mathematics to your work, which we've discussed before. And yeah, I think they're both obviously also committed to abstraction, and they sit very well together. We've had a question about your process, Nigel. This one comes from John Atkin, and it's interesting to hear you talk about the mess of of charcoal. But when it comes to your sculpture, were you ever tempted to use CAD to develop your ideas, and how is it mostly drawing?
I'm afraid it's mostly drawing. People have encouraged me to do something with computers. I have made one substantial work which couldn't have been made without, and that was a piece that was shown in Anley Judah exhibition, the show before last, and it was called Here and Now, There and Then, which was very much a sort of tribute to my wife, who died about that just before my exhibition. In fact, David Judah was very encouraging at that time for me to get straight back and start working. And we made the exhibition within a few months of her death. And the main piece was this piece called Here and Now, There and Then. And it was composed of 4 blocks, each of which had 44 sheets of ply, and elliptical and circular forms morphed from one sheet through to the last sheet. So you've got quite a complex and fascinating interior void, an empty void. And they sat as 4 forms around a central column, which was the interior volumes made real. So it was as though you cut out the interiors and reform them in a column. And that piece couldn't have been made without computer aid. And it was both designed and then cut using computer aided cutting. Otherwise, I like to use notebooks and pencils and messy old charcoal. And
that's an interesting point. You mentioned the title Here and Then, Here and Now. I got
There and Then, yeah.
There and Then, Here and Now, and an interesting difference between your work and Manager's when it comes to your 2-dimensional work is, well, no, there's a similarity and there's a difference. So with your 3-dimensional work, you always give titles.
Yeah.
When it comes to your two-dimensional, like with this diptych, you always rely on a numbering system, which is what Manager also did.
Yes, yes. I mean, mine's just purely that, I mean, I love language, and I like titles. And because the work always the sculpture has some, it's rooted in some experience or place I visited or some emotion or something. The title is fairly important to me. I don't think it's important to other people. It's important to me, but I can't think of a title for every drawing I make. So I decided to start numbering them in 1977 because I couldn't keep track of the work. It's much easier to say to you, for instance, Lizzie, I've got this drawing number 176 or whatever it is, and you can refer to it. It's immediately there. But if I say it's this drawing with a bit of black at the one corner and a smudge at the top, that would refer to many drawings. But Manager's, yes, she occasionally gave titles from the color, and she really liked to refer to a fruit. She was Iranian, and she would give them the name of a fruit in Farsi, but that didn't happen very often.
Yes, the majority are numbered, aren't they? But I do remember there are some which are after fruits or even vegetables.
Yeah, exactly.
A larger scale work here, just again to sort of show how Manager, even though in our exhibition that we've got at the moment in Woodstock is obviously it's a smaller space, so we've chosen more domestic scale work. But again, like you, Manager also worked on quite different scales, and was able to control her work on this scale, which is quite amazing. This was at the business school, and just going forward to two works that we've got in the exhibition. I hope that this shows the kind of the amazing texture, which is almost, I mean, we've called it oil on canvas, but it almost feels like sand, doesn't it, Nigel, the actual texture when you see these works directly?
Yes, I mean, she was very meticulous with the way she developed the final product, if you know what I mean. I mean, whether it was done on what she prepared paper and very carefully textured it in the way she wanted. Then she would lay on a color, which would be textured in itself. And then she would lay on a very thin glaze almost, which didn't apply so much to these, but some of the later ones, but very meticulous. And I always very admired the very small works. The big ones are fantastic and hold their own beautifully. But I always said to her, I think, you know, you're primarily a miniaturist, like a lot of Persian painting, work on a very small and intense scale. But quite rightly, she wouldn't restrict herself to the scale of small works, and then worked on both. But the works on paper, I just find amazing. And in fact, I'm so pleased to be able to say that 8 of her last works have just been acquired by the British Museum, and hopefully will be shown in October. So that's thrilling. She would have been so pleased.
That really is fantastic. Well, that would be wonderful to see them when they do go on show.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that strikes me, we talked about with your work, is the kind of the presence and absence and what's not there. And I think there's still there's a similar oscillation, you know, with Manager's work between the color behind and the color that comes forward. There's this kind of sense of different layers, and that what you can't see is also enticing.
Yes, yes, yes. I think that's true. Also, she was very, you know, kind of sparing in the way she worked. A lot of the works, the majority of them were monochromatic or duochromatic, if there's such a word. This is a show you did for Manager in Venice.
I was trying to remember when this was. Is this 2017 or 2018? I can't remember, but this is a beautiful space in Venice. And I guess it just really lent itself to Manager's work. We called the show Elemental, and you'll see, I think, on the next slide that the space is literally by the water. And
amazing. And the walls were aged and amazingly suited to the work itself.
That's it. There just seemed to be a sort of synchronicity between this. I don't know if I can enlarge this, I perhaps can't, but between the surface of the work and the textures and then the textures of the wall.
And you see the water to the left in the painting. It's incredible. I mean, she was very influenced by the mountains where we used to go, and the frozen lakes up in the mountains, and also water, and I suppose her childhood memories of desert. I remember we were in the Negev, because I'm fond of deserts. We were in the Negev driving, very hot day, to see caravansary, Roman caravansary, and we've been driving hours, and through what I suppose a desert fan would love, but most people would think not so thrilling. And I said, "Isn't this fantastic?" She said, "I grew up in deserts." And I realized that she was being very long-suffering about sitting there in the temperature and waiting to get to a couple of ruined buildings. But it was fun. It was wonderful, and we both had a wonderful trips. We liked traveling together, and travel is important. I think I think it's because it just disrupts everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It changes everything in your life. It makes you see again.
Well, that's why it was so nice to have Manager's first show, in Venice. Really, it felt really appropriate, didn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
And here we've got some photographs of Manager's work in her studio, which is was in Notting Hill, and some of this work, I think this one we have in the exhibition, and a couple of these here. I thought it's a beautiful photo there, Nigel, of the two of you. And I think what's really interesting is the shared palette that you have. I think I picked this one out because of that beautiful orange, which you can also see in some of the work that you have. And you definitely shared some colours, but not all. So the blues and the yellows were definitely not shared, but this wonderful orange was something that you did share, as well as the monochrome. And you can see it here in your work. This is the studio floor. Some of your work.
Yeah.
Just move forward again. And again, I'm just mindful of time because we've got 9 minutes left and people might want to ask some more questions. So here we've got the install shot of the show we've got, and again, you can see it's really best to see the work directly, but we've got Manager's work here, and then Nigel, and we've got Diving for Pearls here. And this is the gallery in Woodstock. And more install shots here.
Yeah, Diving for Pearls is a multiple which I made. It's in an acrylic box, and it's simply a reversal. It's one group of 3 ellipses joining on a circle, and then coming from the top of the acrylic box up in the different orientation with a gap between is another. And I made a whole lot of pieces called with pearl in the title: Diving for Pearls, Natural Pearl, and Pearls in Blue and Black. In fact, there was a big one in, again, in the last Judah show, called Tangled Up in Blue, which was originally going to be called Pearls in Blue and Black, because that's the color it's painted in. But when I finally saw it, I thought, it's Tangled Up in Blue. And then it was followed by that wonderful recent Bob Dylan album called Rough and Rowdy Ways, which if anybody hasn't heard it, and they need convincing that Dylan did deserve the Nobel Prize for Literature, this will do it. It is wonderful, wonderul piece, wonderful songs. Anyway, I won't go on too long about Dylan.
Oh, sorry, just moving forward by accident, but there we are, going on to more of your works on paper that we have in the current exhibition. And again, the similar concerns that you have in sculpture, now in 2 dimensions with the absence and presence.
Absence, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And yes, we've got Diving for Pearls here from another angle, and mirrored, which is I think holds that space really beautifully there in that bay window. Another question from John Atkin, which is, what arts have been a key influence on your work?
What art?
Well, arts. So I guess music, or
Oh, I think probably music. But very clever.
Oh, he said artists, actually. It was a mistype.
Oh, artists.
But it would be interesting to know about music as well.
Yeah, I grew up in a household where music wasn't of huge importance. It was a household of visual people. My mother was at the same art school that I was, and she did embroidery and encouraged me, and there was always an activity of drawing and visual things around. My father wanted to be a printer. He ended up running companies that supplied printing work. So there was color there. And I always remember him using these color wheels and color matching books and things. My grandfather was a stonemason, so carving was, I was introduced to that very early on, but not music. So I find myself incredibly sort of broad range of music that thrills me, but classical music, Schubert particularly, but jazz and singer-songwriters, Joni Mitchell and Van Morrison, and people who write their songs, and obviously Bob Dylan.
And do you have any artists' work in particular that you admire, or you make a point of trying to see, contemporaries at the moment, or do you, it's like some other artists try not to look at other artists' work too much? I know some people try and do that.
I do look at other artists' work inevitably. I think as you get older, I don't know if this is just me, but I think as you get older, although you're interested to see other work, it's your own work that seems to be the most enthralling. Maybe that's just my ego, I don't know, but I find my work the most interesting of contemporary work. How awful to say that in public. Oh well, said now.
I think it's natural, because it's what drives you
Yeah.
to develop the work, and it has to be something that I guess that's what I was pointing to, is it's perhaps not always helpful to look at other people's work, because you've got your own questions that you're answering.
I think that's what happens. Yes, architecture is also something which I find inspiring. Old architecture, ancient architecture, as well as contemporary. I think probably as an art form, I think architecture has influenced me as much as anything.
I remember when we went to the Biennale, there was, is it Joseph, I'm going to say it wrong, Kunther, no, said it wrong.
Yes, Peter Zumthor,
that was it, Peter Zumthor.
Yeah, wonderful architect, yes. People might know him from one thing he did in London, which was one summer, probably about, I don't know, 6, 7, probably more years ago, that Serpentine makes a pavilion. And he did a very modest and wonderful pavilion, which was just flowers, a flower bed and plants. And it changed during the course of the show was on. And it was just so beautiful the way it was a tranquil space. It was so un-architecty, if you know what I mean. Most architects tend to want to, blow the trumpet and beat the drum, but his was very, very beautiful. But he's a wonderful Swiss architect who works with stone beautifully and materials, wonderful. And yes, like you say, he did a fantastic, they had a feature on it, didn't they? Yes,
yes, they did, it was beautiful. So again, another kind of install shot of the exhibition with Manager's work, which we've done a salon hang here, really, to give the work a bit of space to breathe, but they do work in groupings as well. And again, there's a sort of serenity. I think each work, exists on its own terms really beautifully, and it's really difficult to show on a screen, which is why I think the texture comes across on this work here on the right a little.
Yes, I love those. She didn't do so many with orange, but the ones she did are just so beautiful. They sing out the light. It's just wonderful.
And these works where the sort of whiter, lighter color is pulled across, these are sort of earlier works from the 90s, aren't they? And then this is slightly later in the sort of 2008. So that you can definitely see there's a sort of different periods. She was experimenting with different textures and different forms.
Yeah.
And just mindful of time. So I think this is our last slide, which is some of your most recent work from 2021, which is on canvas, which is not something that you've worked on for a while. Perhaps you can, and this is where it's interesting because obviously Manager worked on canvas. So I think it'd be really interesting for you to talk to us about this for the last bit.
Well, I did work on canvas about, I suppose, 15 years ago, but not in so much color. And this was, I have to say, the canvases, not these necessarily, but I started working on canvas again a year ago, I think during lockdown, because Manager very kindly left a few canvases unused. So I thought, well, it'd be very nice to work with those canvases. So I used her canvases. And I like canvas because primarily you don't have to glaze them. So you're really confronted with the texture. Again, their works, the process is very similar, charcoal and charcoal dust and acrylic. The only difference is the solid black of the charcoal I overpaint with acrylic black. But they're very stable, they're all fixed. And I just find it very satisfying that you could just take the image and put it on the wall without having to frame it and glaze it. And also, you as I say, the texture has a difference and a more sort of material quality, which I like.
It's interesting that they're not framed as well. That's where it's just like Manager's work as well on canvas, with no frame,
Yeah.
but different to your other work, and they do definitely have a different presence. I think that's everything. We've had a question about just. I think, well, if anyone's got any last questions, we've had people just wanting to know when the exhibition runs to Woodstock. We would love to see you there. We're open until the 19th of July. We're open every day apart from Tuesdays. The weekend, it's 11 till 4 on Sunday, but otherwise it is from 10 till 5. Are there any questions as we have Nigel still here with us? I'm mindful that we just hit 3 o'clock. Lots of people thanking you in the chat box, Nigel. I have to say that was really good. I know we've done a couple of these, Nigel, but I think every time we talk, there's something new that comes out, which is what's really lovely. And it's always great to do a virtual tour of your studio, even if we're not physically there. It's the next best thing.
Well, it's really enjoyable. Thank you, Lizzie.
So grateful for your time.
And nice to, the only two people I have in thumbnails on my screen, Kate and Mike Westbrook, and terrific to see you both. And Karen, you're there, which is lovely. My cousin Karen. Anyway, enough of that, but lovely to see you. And thank you everybody for coming and listening to me drone on.
Absolutely. And if anybody's got any questions afterwards or wants to arrange a visit to the studio, my email's there on the screen. And we will, as I said at the beginning, this has been recorded. We will be sharing this on our YouTube channel. And so thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Nigel. And I hope everybody enjoys this wonderful sunny day, and long may it continue. And we'll see you soon in Woodstock.